Boston and Detroit are two legendary cities. One is known for its notorious black hustlers, and the other for its infamous Irish American criminals. Many people might be unaware of the connection between the two cities. Not once, but twice did Detroit players try to set up shop in Boston. How much did these guys from Detroit influence the Boston streets? Is it possible that Boston's trademark brand Adidas was originally made popular by the Detroit guys? Were they trafficking culture along with their illicit products? Let's explore, shall we? What's up, everybody? Welcome back. It's been a long time, but I promised you guys I would never stop making these videos. Anyhow, I have a great tale for you today from Boston's underworld, and it also includes another notorious crime-ridden city. Many people might not know it, but not only once, but twice did Detroit hustlers try to move in on Boston's powder game. The later attempt is more commonly known and has been covered by a decent amount of creators who focus on Detroit's underworld. The attempt that is more well known involves a notorious crew, Young Boys Incorporated, which was a legendary street crew from the Motor City. Wonderful Wayne Davis spearheaded this mission to set up shop in one of Boston's most notorious housing projects, Columbia Point in Dorchester. There are many people who have heard this tale, but a lot of them might not be aware of the fact that some hustlers from Detroit came about 10 years prior and tried to do the same thing. They bumped heads with the Black Godfathers of Boston, the Campbell brothers. Both sides were ready to battle over the lucrative racket, but the Detroit guys didn't realize that the Campbell brothers had a trick up their sleeve. Now, some of you might be asking the same question I was. Why would hustlers from Detroit, which is halfway across the country, come to Boston and set up shop? I could see New York and Philly guys, maybe even Baltimore or DC, but Detroit is so far away. Little side note, in the 1980s when hard hit the streets of Boston, Darrell Whiting, aka God from Queens, and his crew of New York boys took over part of the Orchard Park Projects, a notorious housing development in Roxbury. Now that makes logistical sense, but Detroit is quite a hike. The motivation for such a big move was probably because of how much money could be made in Boston. Boston had plenty of users, but it had a limited and inconsistent supply. The price of blow is what they called it in Detroit. In Boston, we use that word for white, but they used it for brown. I don't know, I think it's a Midwest thing because they do it in Chicago too. But either way, the product sold for 5 times more in Boston than it did in Detroit. A $20 package in Detroit could go for $100 plus in Boston. That right there is the main inspiration for making such a bold move and setting up shop in a faraway land. Columbia Point was the perfect place to trap as well. It was like its own little city isolated in a little corner of Dorchester. The old point was a massive, dreary concrete jungle. There was only one way in and one way out. It was perfect for security, and there was always a steady stream of customers. Now, before we discuss Young Boys Incorporated and the Columbia Point projects, let's dial it back like 10 years before that to another situation where Detroit pushers were trying to muscle in on Boston's underworld. Back in the 1960s, the H trade was just beginning in earnest for Boston, and like most large northern cities, it was mostly sold and consumed in black neighborhoods. This was still the time period when the Italians controlled the supply via the French connection. Crude number 3H was harvested in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and eastern Turkey, then sent to Corsica to be synthesized and smuggled into the United States. A few years later, because of our involvement in Vietnam, soldiers made connections in Southeast Asia, aka the Golden Triangle, which included the countries of Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar, aka Burma, whichever you feel like calling it. This was where number 4, the most pure of all powder, was made. Throughout the 1970s, literal tons of China Blanco was shipped to America to be diluted and sold for insane profits. Now enough of the H history lesson and back to the South End in Roxbury where the Campbell brothers ran the underground rackets. The Italians who controlled the supply and only dealt with a few select people, the Campbell brothers had a good resume and they'd already been in the feds for a bank robbery they committed in 1957, so they qualified. There they befriended fellow Bostonian and Southie legend Whitey, who was also in the feds for a bank robbery. Now, the Campbell brothers were no joke. They controlled the rackets by intimidation and fear. While they seemed like intelligent and reasonable men, they were not afraid to use violence and sometimes excessively. Now, in the late summer of 1969, word on the street had gotten back to the Campbells that there was a Detroit hustler pushing H in their turf. In 1969, a man named Charles Ratman McDonald came to Roxbury, which was Boston's equivalent to Harlem or Chicago's South Side, being the heart of the city's black community. Now, whether or not McDonald had connections with the Italians, I heard that he was connected to a guy named Big Frank Nitti back in Detroit, or was coming to Boston on the behalf of Detroit kingpins like Eddie Jackson. Perhaps he was just an independent operator. I'm not 100% sure. Either way, McDonald saw an opportunity in Boston's growing H trade and decided to make a play. The Campbell brothers, Arnold and Alvin, along with their feared enforcer Deke Chandler, who, side note, grew up in Roxbury with Whitey's right-hand man Stevie Flemmi. In the 1940s, Roxbury was much more mixed. By the late 1950s, it had become almost exclusively black. But this crew ran the neighborhood with an iron fist. Anyone pushing powder had to go through them. Anyone running girls had to kick up a percentage. Basically, anybody doing something illegal had to pay to operate in Roxbury. So naturally, when a Detroit hustler shows up in the city pushing fire product for cheap and he didn't check in with the Campbells, it was going to be a problem. Not only did McDonald dare to peddle in Roxbury without clearing it with the Campbells first, but he was making connections and seeking allies in this new market as well, some of which the Campbells already had issues with. Upon his arrival to Boston, McDonald made connections with a seedy underworld figure like Jack Touch Bano, a small-time H peddler, and he managed a couple streetwalkers named Mackenzie Candy Martindale and Mildred Perry. In late August, Candy became acquainted with McDonald at the courthouse. Candy was pressing charges against her handler Touch Bano for being too rough with her. McDonald told her if she's a cop caller, she can't ride with him. Even after stating this, McDonald still got involved with both women and their man Touch. On Labor Day 1969, the Campbell brothers called for a sit-down at the legendary Sugar Shack in Boston's South End. Before gentrification, the South End and Lower Roxbury were the pulse of Black Boston. Names like Stevie Wonder, James Brown, etc. played at the Sugar Shack. Unfortunately for everyone that was involved, the talk went south very quickly, and it was clear that there would be no peace on the streets. What's up, everybody? Long time no see. Hope everybody's been well. Hope you guys are enjoying this video. Just want to pop in real quick and say what's up and just show up, This tracksuit number one. Tell you gotta have at least one tracksuit if you're from Massachusetts or the greater Boston area. Anyways, some of this stuff might be a little redundant for people who have been watching my channel for a long time. My first video that ever hit 100,000 views was about the Campbell brothers, and I told a lot of these stories in that one. But it was taken down like a year ago. It was my first video to ever hit 100,000 views. I got like over 200 something thousand views. But some lady said that her daddy took a picture I used in it, and it's literally like if you type in Old Orchard Park projects in, I said Old Orchard Beach. If you put in Orchard Park projects Boston, it's the first picture that pops up, and it's all over Facebook, all over the internet. I should have fought it, but there was too much stuff going on, so it was taken off my channel. So people have been like, oh, blah, 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 you should redo it. So in a certain type of way, I'm redoing it here, but I also just wanted to pop in, say what's up, and just show them. Yeah. The sit down just made the situation that much worse. When told by the Campbells that McDonald would need to go through them if he wanted to deal in Roxbury, McDonald laughed and said not only was he going to push his own package, but he was going to get the Campbells' mama strung out and put her on the corner. See, McDonald was a real G. He was coming from Detroit, which in the late 1960s was the most violent city in the entire country. He wasn't easily intimidated. But the Campbells were ruthless as well, and the beef was officially on. There was one thing that McDonald wasn't aware of, and that was that the Campbells had a secret weapon up their sleeve in the lethal Johnny Martorano. Before he became the main stepper from Winter Hill, Johnny spent a lot of his time in the South End. When he was younger, he would party there with Jimmy the Bear Flemmi. He also ran a family-owned club on Basin Street. Johnny liked the clubs and had many black friends, something that other Boston organized crime guys didn't condone at the time. In 1968, Johnny claims he became acquainted with the Campbells when Alvin, aka Duke's wife Roberta, came to Johnny begging him to help her. Alvin and Arnold were being held for a heinous crime. On November 10, 1968, 3 men were unalived and 2 men were wounded in a beef over government funds. An ex-con named Guido St. Laurent, who was blinded in an accident in prison, began a grassroots civil rights organization called Negro in 1966. It was an acronym. All the letters stood for something. I believe it was like New England Grassroots Organization or something like that. Many people believed it was just a front for illegal activities, but either way, St. Laurent was able to get his hands on a sizable government grant. These grants were being issued all over the country in urban minority neighborhoods. At this time, St. Laurent, who was becoming well known for speaking on various radio shows, he was also connected with militant blacks in cities all over the country, secured a whopping $1.9 million grant, which in today would probably be close to like $10 million or something like that. Now, of course, the Campbell brothers wanted a piece of this even though they had nothing to do with it. Even though St. Laurent was blind, he was still a tough old con and wasn't going to be pressed. In response, the Campbell brothers decided to show up at Negro's headquarters on Blue Hill Ave, the main thoroughfare for Black Boston, and wipe out everyone in the office. Above a pizza parlor sat the office, which held Guido St. Laurent, Carnell Eaton, who was a Roxbury dealer and civil rights activist, Fred Rose, a man from Roxbury, Harold King, a Cleveland civil rights activist, and Ronald Hicks, a Roxbury dealer. King and St. Laurent were unalived instantly. Eaton crawled outside to expire on the sidewalk. Rose was hit and then crawled under a desk and hid. Hicks also survived, and word on the street was he was going to testify. Martorano claims that he felt bad for Roberta and was compelled to help. He said that he didn't know the Campbell brothers before this, which in my opinion is complete malarkey. If he hung out in the South End in Roxbury, then he knew the Campbells. The brothers were in jail and their case did not look good, so Martorano set out to find Hicks. On one wintry day, Johnny saw Hicks' distinct yellow Cadillac pulled over by the Fenway, so Martorano parked and walked up to the car. Hicks invited him into the car and asked him if he wanted a toot of some of Columbia's finest. Johnny said of course he did, and when Hicks lowered his head to do one, Martorano put a slug in the back of his head. A few weeks later, without their star witness, the case fell apart and the Campbells were acquitted and allowed to go home. Now back to the beef with McDonald. So now things were beginning to heat up on the streets, and the Campbell brothers called on Martorano once again. On September 22nd, 1969, McDonald and Touch Bano blasted or tried to blast Deke Chandler in front of the Sugar Shack, but Chandler got away. 3 days later, in response, Martorano bumped into Touch at a club and poked him up. R.I.P. Touch. Of course, Martorano says this was completely by coincidence. He wasn't planning on doing this. He has an excuse for everything. A week later, while McDonald and the women were scheming in Perry's apartment, they saw a dealer named Willie Poison Gray, who they believed worked for the Campbells as a dealer enforcer, pull up in front of the building. The girls lured him into the apartment, whacked him, and then they dumped him next to Franklin Field at 3:30 in the morning. Needing some backup, McDonald went to New Hampshire to pick up a man they referred to as Pickles. McDonald had organized crime contacts back home in Detroit, like Big Frank Nitti and Greg's Bugs Moran Usher, who had a strong relationship with the Colombo family in New York City. These underworld connections probably helped Ratman McDonald while operating on the East Coast. On their way back from New Hampshire, they stopped in the Merrimack Valley city of Lowell, Mass, aka Mill City, to pick up some tools from two men named Kitchen and Williams. Shortly after that, they tried to get Deke Chandler again on October 4th, 1969, but they missed their target for a second time. This all came to an end when on October 22nd, 1969, Mildred Perry got into a cab and the ratchet that had unalived Poison and was involved in various other crimes accidentally went off. The cops were called and she got arrested. Now why she even had this thing is beyond me. It should have been disposed a long time ago somewhere. When the cops told her she was going down for Poison, she folded and told them everything. McDonald was subsequently picked up and shipped off to prison, and thanks to Johnny Martorano, the Campbells would continue to reign supreme on the Roxbury streets all the way through the 1970s. Which brings us back to the late 1970s and Columbia Point, the next phase of Detroit hustlers coming to the city of Boston. Seeing how lucrative the game was in Boston, members of Young Boys Incorporated began to flood Columbia Point with Brown. They also began to recruit local kids with potential to assist in the rapidly growing business. Some of these younger point guys were even so trusted and well liked that leader Wonderful Wayne Davis had them come back with him to Detroit to handle business and work as a bodyguard. One of these young men was Stephen Shot Seeley. Seeley would later go on to marry famous Boston singer Bobby Brown's sister. Years later, he would lose his life while sitting in the driver's seat of Whitney Houston's brand new white Bentley in front of a club in Roxbury. Bobby Brown sat on the curb, rocked by what he had just seen. But back in the late 1970s and early 80s, Schatz was just a young guy with a lot of potential, and the Detroit guys noticed this and took him under their wing. This operation ran well through the early 80s. The Point was a perfect place to trap. It was like a fortress. But by the mid-80s, guys from the Point were getting sick of the out-of-towners and eventually clicked up and forced them out. This was the beginning of one of the most feared crews in Boston's history, the Columbia Point Dawgs. By the mid-1980s, all the neighborhoods and projects in Boston were clicking up, and many identified their hoods with sports teams. The Point guys almost always wore Philadelphia Phillies hats or Pittsburgh Pirate ones. Also, the market was changing. H wasn't the popular product anymore. Some genius figured out how to make Colombia's finest into a rock form, and people went absolutely crazy for it. The Dawgs followed the blueprint that YBI had laid out for them, just now with a different lucrative product, and also they worked for themselves. No more boss. The black kingpins of the 60s and 70s were a thing of the past. By the late 80s and early 90s, it was mostly crews of young males wearing snapback hats and starter jackets, serving rocks and battling over prime real estate. The streets became less organized and much more violent. In 1982, the Campbell brothers were busted for the last time. Their power had been greatly diminished anyways by this time, and their feared enforcer, Deke Chandler, was unalived in 1977, standing on a front porch in Roxbury. People believe it was an altercation over a woman. Either way, it was an end of an era. Now, before we wrap it up in this video, we've discussed the criminal connections between Detroit and Boston over the years. Detroit has influenced how the street crews operate in Boston to a certain extent, but they also influenced the urban culture of the city. Adidas has been Boston's brand since I've been alive. People go as far as to throw up 3 fingers for the 3 stripes of Adidas. There were also Adidas trees where local adolescents would throw up Adidas with the laces tied together up on a tree like a decoration. The most famous one belonged to the Interville Posse, but I'm told that they were all over the city. Now, still to this day, Boston represents with Adidas. Nike is for New York, by the way. Everybody from the Boston area should have at least 1 pair of A-Dogs and an Adidas tracksuit. I personally have 2 tracksuits, just saying. Now, it's a fact that Young Boys Incorporated from Detroit rocked almost exclusively the Adidas Top 10 sneaker along with their wide-brimmed hats. This was in the late 1970s. When did Boston first start rocking Adidas? Did Detroit originally bring it here and then we made it ours? I'm honestly not 100% sure. Let me know what you guys think in the comments or what you may know. I'm sure there's some OGs listening to this that know the true story. Please bless us. I hope you guys like this video. It's nice to be back. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I know it's been a long time. Sorry, this year has been a rough year, but I'm all settled into the new place. Things have calmed down. My head's clear. Now I can make videos. Hopefully start making them regularly again. Just want to start with something small here and just see if my computer could handle exporting it. And if, I'm worried about the ad guidelines too because I haven't released a video in so long. But this is pretty vanilla. I use my little code words and stuff. And I just had to pop in again just to show you the second track. So all the way down to the feet. Got A-Dogs on the feet. Come on, man. Come on now. It's Jay Trims. Come on, baby. Hopefully I'm back. I think I'm back. So if you guys like this video, again, thank you to that person that complained about the old video to have it taken down so I could revisit this information. I found the notebook with all the notes hidden somewhere deep when I was moving, so I don't know, I could throw the script together. But I hope everybody's doing well. I missed you guys. Hopefully I'll be back on a regular basis. See if I can remember it. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed, but most importantly, take care of yourselves, your friends, your fellow human beings. Something like that. Take care. God bless.